The simple act of bending over to pull on her wool socks left Clara Jensen breathless. A slow, heavy pulse knocked under her skin, a frantic prisoner pounding from within. Her due date was a mere 5 days away, and her body had become a foreign country, its geography unfamiliar, its laws unpredictable. Even lifting a glass of water felt like a perilous test of balance and will. She eased herself onto the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning in sympathy, and pressed a palm against the taut, impossible curve of her stomach. She waited for the wave of lightheadedness to pass, focusing on the faint, familiar sounds drifting from the living room. Voices wove down the hall, Liam's soft, eager replies punctuating Vivian's brisk, instructional tones. It was as if her own home had become a radio, perpetually tuned to a station she had never chosen and did not enjoy. This apartment, with its high ceilings and north-facing windows that caught the weak winter sun, was Clara's. Her beloved Nana Rose's name was still etched with elegant permanence on the brass mailbox downstairs, a testament to the life she had built here. But lately, every creak of the floorboards, every clink of a dish, felt like permission granted to someone else. Vivian had moved in to help. That was the word she used, help, the way some people say hurricane or inevitability. It was never a request. A widow of 15 years, Vivian possessed a spine of tempered iron and a widow's unshakable certainty. She had endured loss, and therefore, she knew the world and its workings better than anyone else. She filtered every decision, every emotion, through the twin sieves of her own experience and her rigid righteousness. Clara had met her before the wedding, a whirlwind of firm handshakes, perfectly timed casseroles, and backhanded compliments disguised as concern. "You have such a interesting sense of style, dear," she'd said, eyeing Clara's vintage dress. "So brave." Clara, buoyed by love and the optimism of a new beginning, had believed she could manage this force of nature. She'd smiled, nodded, and stored away the tiny barbs. But after the second trimester, when the relentless nausea had finally receded, leaving her exhausted and vulnerable, Vivian had parked her large, hard-shelled suitcase by the door and announced that a first-time mother simply should not be left to her own devices. Liam, ever the grateful son, visibly relieved of a burden he hadn't known how to carry, welcomed her with open arms and an open calendar. Vivian set her bag in the second bedroom, Clara's office, her writing room, and began narrating their days. Eat this, not that. Don't nap now, it will ruin your sleep tonight. Put on a scarf, the baby will catch a chill. Call a different doctor, this one seems far too young to know what he is doing. Clara's refrain became a quiet, desperate mantra. Thank you for the soup, Vivian. Thank you for folding the laundry. She repeated to herself over and over that this was temporary, a brief season of intrusion for the sake of her child. Liam was not a cruel man. He was simply a man who bent, like a willow in the wind, toward the person who pushed the hardest. He had been the man who, on the night they met at a crowded gallery opening, drew little maps for her on a cocktail napkin. He told her where he'd lived in the city, what he loved, the roar of a soccer crowd at Soldier Field, the way the city lights glittered off the river at dusk, the late-night rides on the Brown Line, where the tracks soared above the streets like a steel necklace strung with lights. He was kind, attentive, quick with a laugh that made Clara feel seen. They rented this apartment together, a place she later bought from her grandmother's estate, and made plans that felt like stepping into a warm, brightly lit room from a cold, dark street. After the wedding, Vivian's weekly phone calls became daily check-ins. Then life had silently, inexorably rearranged itself into 3 chairs at the same small kitchen table. And when the pregnancy test turned positive, the chair at the head of that table was already, unquestionably, occupied. On the morning of the crucial 3rd trimester clinic appointment, Clara leaned against the doorframe, her body a symphony of aches. Liam was on one knee, tying his shoe. Vivian hovered nearby, Clara's winter coat draped over her forearm like a waiter's towel. Her critical eyes scanned Clara from head to toe and back again. "You're going out in that?" Vivian asked, her tone implying Clara had chosen to wear a thundercloud instead of a simple, stretchy black maternity dress and a long cardigan. "Your back is practically exposed. These trains are drafty. You'll catch your death, and the baby will pay the price." "It's comfortable," Clara said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted this morning, this important checkup, to be a bridge they could cross together, not another battlefield. Liam offered a guilty, placating smile that vanished the second Vivian cleared her throat, a sound as sharp as a gunshot in the quiet hall. "Mom's probably right, Clara. Maybe the longer coat, just to be safe."
Clara buttoned her cardigan over her dress, swallowing the hot, immediate retort that rose in her throat. As they stepped into the hallway, she told herself to borrow strength from small, mundane things. Elevator. Sidewalk. Station. The city moved around them with its ordinary, brutal winter efficiency, a palette of gray upon gray. On the L platform, the wind cut through the seams of their clothing, and the rails hummed a low, anticipatory song somewhere to the south. The train arrived with a deafening roar, and the three of them were swept inside by the momentum of the crowd and the press of strangers. Bodies packed close, phones glowed like dim, captive stars above bowed heads. The car smelled of stale coffee, wet wool, and the faint metallic tang of the cold. Clara gripped a polished steel pole, her knuckles white. Another jolt of the train, another contraction of the crowd, and she was knocked against the end of a bench. A man sitting beside it, his face etched with the weariness of a long shift, looked up. His eyes flicked to her pronounced belly, then to her pale face. He stood up with a soft grunt. "Here," he said, his voice kind but tired. "Take it." "Thank you," Clara managed, easing down onto the vacated seat. The relief was immediate, a warmth spreading through her tired thighs that felt like pure mercy. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and rested a hand over the baby's slow, rolling movement. Vivian, still standing, looked at the empty seat the way a cat regards a recently vacated patch of sunlight, with a sense of inherent entitlement. Her mouth pinched, then smoothed into an expression of magnanimous sacrifice. "Liam," she said, her voice low but perfectly calibrated to be heard over the rumble of the train. "My knees are not what they used to be. The arthritis." Liam glanced at his mother's carefully constructed, pained expression, then at Clara's face, which was finally showing a hint of color. The train jolted again, a chorus of straps and hands gripping tighter, and he made his choice. He leaned over, his fingers closing around Clara's forearm. "Clara, Mom's tired. Come on, be respectful for a second." The world did not so much go silent as it became hyper-focused. The roar of the train faded into a distant hum. Clara's body refused to move. The seat beneath her was the only solid island she had found all morning. The baby shifted in protest inside her. She looked up at Liam's face, not malicious, but eager, desperate to smooth over the ripples, to quiet the loudest complainer. Vivian's gaze was a physical wait, waiting, assessing. The man who had given up his seat watched the exchange, a frown deepening between his eyebrows. A woman standing near the door, her own arms full of grocery bags, stiffened visibly. Heat, sudden and fierce, rose under Clara's collarbone. Liam tugged again, not hard enough to bruise, but with enough insistence to make standing seem like the path of least resistance. Her knees trembled as she pushed herself up. Vivian lowered herself into the spot with a performative sigh that offered the sound of gratitude without the feeling. "Thank you, son," she said, her voice carrying to every person who was pretending not to watch. "At my age, you must prioritize your health. The young are so resilient." In the dark reflection of the train window, Clara saw her own face go pale again. She was so tired of being the reasonable one, Reasonableness had carried her through stacks of dishes she didn't dirty, through unsolicited advice on everything from prenatal vitamins to perineal massage, through doctor's appointments where Vivian interrupted to question the younger doctor's credentials. It had carried her through nights where she swallowed tears because crying would only invite a lecture on emotional fortitude. But as the train lurched around a curve, forcing her to tighten her grip on the pole, something began to curdle deep within her. Across the aisle, a teenage girl with a streak of purple in her hair narrowed her eyes, shooting a look of pure venom at Vivian and Liam. Further down, an older man in a tradesman's jacket shook his head once, sharp and disgusted. Someone muttered, "For Christ's sake," the words floating through the air like a discarded leaf. No one claimed them. The humiliation settled on Clara slowly, a fine, cold drizzle that soaked through to her bones. It wasn't about the seat. It was the ritual of it, the way Liam's fingers assumed her body was his to relocate. The performance of weakness from a woman who was never weak in any moment that truly mattered. It was the utter, complete erasure of her needs. She thought of her apartment. Nana Rose's beloved china wrapped in newspaper at the back of a cabinet because Vivian found it quaint. The framed photo of Clara and Liam laughing at Montrose Beach, which Vivian had repositioned to make room for a hideous ceramic urn that held the ashes of a dog Clara had never met. The calendar in the kitchen, filled with appointments in Vivian's precise script for things Clara had never agreed to. She heard her doctor's voice from last week, gentle but firm. "Clara, you need rest. Your blood pressure is creeping up. Stress is the enemy right now." And then she heard Vivian's voice overlaying it like a cold shadow. "We didn't have all these worries in my day, and we turned out just fine. Young women are simply too soft now." Clara swallowed hard, the taste of copper and powerlessness filling her mouth. At the next stop, the doors hissed open, and a wave of cold, fresh air moved through the car. A woman who had been seated near the middle rose with a slow, careful grace. She was older than Vivian by at least a decade, maybe two. She was wrapped in a plain, well-worn wool coat and a scarf the color of oatmeal that looked hand-knit. Her hair was a soft, cloud-like gray. She moved with a steadiness that spoke of a lifetime of knowing exactly when to speak. Her eyes, a clear, light blue, took in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The young, very pregnant woman on her feet, the round stomach, the imperious mother now seated, the chastened son, the uneasy, judgmental silence of the witnesses. She stepped directly toward Clara, ignoring everyone else. "Sit here, honey," she said. And her voice had the firm, comforting certainty of a porch light switching on in the deep dusk. It broked no argument. She took Clara's hand, her own skin papery and cool, and guided her firmly towards the seat she had just vacated. There was no fuss, no sermon delivered to the car. The vehicle quieted further the way a room does when a simple, unadorned truth is told. Clara lowered herself into the seat, her breath shuddering, her eyes blurred with hot, unshed tears. She could feel Vivian stare like a blast of cold air on damp skin. She could feel Liam's confusion solidifying into embarrassment. The older woman bent closer, just enough so that her words were for Clara, Liam, and Vivian alone, a private verdict delivered in public. "God sees everything," she whispered. The sentence landed not as a curse, not as a threat, but with the clarity of a silver bell. It was a reminder, a declaration that the ledger of right and wrong was not being kept by the loudest, most demanding person in the room.
Clara blinked hard, nodded, and swallowed down the sob that threatened to escape. Beneath her palm, the baby nudged her, a small, firm hello, as if answering a roll call. At the following stop, the woman stepped off the train without a backward glance, her oatmeal-colored scarf trailing behind her like a bookmark placed in a long, complex story. The doors closed, the train kept moving, the city scenery unspooling in a monotonous tapestry of brick and glass. Vivian crossed her ankles and stared with feigned fascination at an advertisement for a personal injury lawyer above the opposite seats. Liam shifted his weight from one foot to the other, let his hand drop from the pole, then grabbed it again. He ankled his body as if to speak to Clara, but no words came. For once, he had no script. The rest of the ride passed in the tense, noisy silence of commuters. When they reached their stop, Clara stood carefully. She nodded her thanks to the anonymous man who had first offered his seat, a look of shared understanding passing between them. She stepped onto the platform with the stranger's sentence still warm in her ears. God sees everything. It traveled with her, a tiny glowing ember in her chest. Down the stairs, onto the wind-bitten street, past the clinic's automatic doors, through the sterile waiting room, and into the chair where the blood pressure cuff would tighten on her arm, leaving a red, angry kiss. It was a shield, invisible to everyone but her. The checkup was a blur. Her blood pressure was, as predicted, elevated. The doctor repeated his advice about rest and reducing stress. Vivian hovered, offering her own commentary until the doctor pointedly asked her to wait in the waiting room. Liam sat silently in the corner, studying his hands. The walk home was silent. The train ride back was a study in avoidance. When they finally arrived back at the apartment, Clara went straight to her bedroom, claiming a headache. She lay in the dim room, her hand on her belly, the words echoing in her mind. God sees everything. But she wasn't thinking about a divine ledger. She was thinking about evidence, proof, witnesses. That night, after a tense, silent dinner where Vivian held court on the importance of listening to one's elders, Clara waited until the apartment was quiet. She took out her laptop. With a calm she didn't know she possessed, she researched Illinois tenant and property laws. She read about inherited property and marital assets. She bookmarked pages on sole custody and grandparent rights. The glow of the screen illuminated her determined face. The next morning, she made a phone call. 3 days later, she was sitting in a sleek, modern office in the Loop across from a woman named Diana Moss. Diana's firm specialized in family law, and her reputation for being a tenacious, unflinching advocate for mothers was well known. "The apartment is yours," Diana said without preamble after Clara had laid out the situation, her voice shaking only slightly. "Inherited property is non-marital in Illinois. He can't touch it. Now, about custody, or what we now call the allocation of parental responsibilities, we'll file for you to be the sole residential parent. Given what you've told me about his deferential relationship with his mother, it's a realistic goal." "And his mother?" Clara asked, her voice firmer now. "She talks about taking the baby for weekends. She acts like she has a right." Diana's eyes were sharp, intelligent. "We can petition for an order of protection that covers both of them if necessary. But you need to start documenting everything, Clara. Every comment, every threat, every uninvited visit. Time, date, what was said. Save text messages. If you can, record conversations. Illinois is a one-party consent state. You can legally record any conversation you are a part of. Judges like evidence. The more you have, the stronger your case." Clara left the office with a retainer agreement and a new, fierce purpose. That afternoon, while Vivian was at the pharmacy buying more of the herbal supplements she insisted Clara take, and Liam was at work, Clara called a locksmith. She watched as the old lock was removed and a new heavy-duty deadbolt was installed. She then installed 2 small, discreet Wi-Fi cameras about the front door, one facing the hallway, one facing the interior entryway. Each click of the camera's mounting bracket felt like a declaration of war. The first test came a week later, a pounding on the door so forceful it made the frames on the wall shudder. Vivian's voice, sharp enough to cut glass, sliced through the wood. "Clara, open this door right now. We need to talk about the baby's room. This stubbornness has gone on long enough." Liam's voice, softer but equally strained, followed. "Clara, please just open up. Mom's really upset." Clara, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, didn't move. The camera app on her phone was open, recording. The baby, Lena, stirred in her bassinet at the noise. "You need to leave," Clara called out, her voice steady, clear, and cold. "I've asked you not to come by unannounced."
This is my son's home too. You can't keep us out. You're being hysterical. This is my home, and you are harassing me. I'm asking you to leave, or I will call the police. She heard a muffled argument on the other side of the door, then the sound of Vivian storming down the hall. Liam lingered for a moment longer. Clara, this isn't you, he pleaded. You're right. It's not, she said to the closed door. She saved the video file and labeled it with the date and time. She added an entry to the growing log on her computer. January 22nd, 3:15 p.m. Vivian and Liam pounded on the door. Vivian yelled about the baby's room, called me hysterical, refused to leave until threatened with the police. The visits and calls didn't stop. Some days it was flowers left at the door with notes from Liam. Just, please, Clara, I just want to see my daughter. We can work this out. Other days it was voicemails from Vivian, her voice syrupy with fake concern that quickly curdled into threats. You'll regret alienating us, Clara. A child needs her family. You won't win this. Each one was meticulously documented. Every text screenshot, every audio recording, every log entry was another brick in the fortress she was building around herself and her daughter. One night, Liam called. He sounded tired, defeated. Clara, I need to see my daughter. I know Mom can be a lot, but she loves Lena. You can't keep her from us. Clara held the phone, her gaze fixed on Lena, sleeping peacefully in her crib. You had your chance, Liam. The night she was born, you weren't there. You chose your mother, not us. Don't call me again unless it's through my lawyer. He was silent for a long moment. I just want to make things right. You can't make things right while you're standing in her shadow. Until you realize that, you'll never really want what's best for Lena. You'll only want what Vivian tells you to want. She ended the call and blocked his number. The silence in the apartment was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was hers.
The weeks turned into a rhythm of feedings, diapers, legal paperwork, and evidence gathering. Diana Moss was impressed with Clara's meticulous records. This is exactly what we need, she said during one of their meetings. With this, a judge will see exactly who they are. You've done everything right, Clara. Clara allowed herself a small, tight smile. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing. The confrontation she had both dreaded and anticipated came on a cold, clear night in March. Lena was 6 weeks old. Clara was on the couch, exhausted but unable to sleep, a dull ache spreading across her lower back. At first, she thought it was just the usual postpartum discomfort, but then the pain sharpened, intensifying into a series of crippling cramps that stole her breath. It was too early for this. Something was wrong. Liam, she called out, her voice tight with panic. He was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. He looked up startled as she clutched her abdomen, her face pale. Something's wrong, she gasped. It's the baby. I think it's an infection. We need to go to the hospital, now. Another wave of pain, sharper than the first, ripped through her, forcing a cry from her lips. But from down the hall, from Vivian's room, came a theatrical, gasping wail. Liam! Liam! Liam froze, torn. My heart, Vivian cried, her voice choked with perfectly timed coughs. I can't breathe. Liam, don't let me die alone. The choice, once again, was presented to him. His wife, writhing in pain on the couch, his infant daughter in her bassinet, or his mother. Panic flared in his eyes. He looked at Clara, his face a mask of helpless indecision. Just hold on, he stammered. Let me check on her. He wrenched his hand away from Clara's grasping fingers and ran toward his mother's room. Clara stared after him, the betrayal so complete, so absolute, that for a moment the pain vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She heard his frantic voice on the phone in the other room, but he wasn't calling an ambulance for her. He was describing Vivian's symptoms, his voice high with panic. In that moment, Clara knew. If she waited for him, she might die. Lena might be left alone with them. Her hands shaking, not from pain, but from a furious, focused adrenaline, she fumbled for her own phone. She dialed 911. I'm 6 weeks postpartum, she told the dispatcher, her voice ragged but clear. I have severe abdominal pain and a fever. I believe I have a postpartum infection. My husband is refusing to help me. My address is 1812 North Jansen Avenue. Please send an ambulance. My infant daughter is here with me. She gave them the code for the building's front door. Then she called the one person she knew would come without question. Dad, she said, her voice breaking for the first time. I need you. Now. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Paramedics burst into the apartment, guided by Claire's instructions. They found her on the floor, pale and sweating, her vitals crashing. They moved with swift, efficient urgency, starting an IV, administering medication, preparing her for transport. Liam hovered in the doorway of his mother's room, Vivian clinging to his arm, her heart attack seemingly forgotten in the face of real drama. What's going on? Liam asked, his voice small. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and a name badge that read Reyes, shot him a look of pure contempt. Your wife has a severe uterine infection. Sepsis is setting in. She could have died. The words hung in the air, stark and damning. At that moment, Clara's father arrived. He took in the scene in one horrified glance, his daughter on a gurney, his granddaughter crying in her bassinet, his son-in-law standing uselessly with a perfectly healthy Vivian. He went straight to Clara, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you both. He gathered a crying Lena into his arms, his gaze meeting Liam's over the baby's head. The disappointment in Arthur's eyes was a physical force. Without a word, he turned his back, following the paramedics out the door. The hospital stay was a blur of antibiotics, fear, and a slow, steady return to health. Diana Moss visited her there, a leather-bound folder in her hand. The 911 call is on record, Diana said without preamble. The paramedics' report is devastating for them. It clearly states you were abandoned during a medical emergency. Combined with all your documentation, Clara, we have everything we need. Clara, weak but clear-eyed, nodded. Do it. The Cook County Courthouse was a monument of grim gray stone. Clara walked up the steps, Arthur by her side, holding a sleeping Lena. She wore a simple, dark dress. Her hands were steady. Inside, the air buzzed with the low murmur of fractured lives. Diana Moss was a calm, immovable presence at the petitioner's table. Across the aisle, Liam slouched, looking hollowed out. Vivian sat beside him, ramrod straight, dressed in unrelenting black, her face a mask of affronted dignity. The judge, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that missed nothing, called the case. Diana presented her evidence with surgical precision. She played the audio recordings from the train. She showed the security footage of Vivian pounding on the door. She presented the log of harassing messages. She entered the paramedic report into evidence, reading the damning line aloud. Husband found attending to his mother, who presented with no acute distress. Petitioner was found on floor in critical condition. Liam's attorney tried to argue about high emotions and family misunderstandings. Vivian, when given the chance to speak, launched into a monologue about disrespect and a young woman's hysterical tendencies. The judge listened, her expression impassive. Then she turned to Liam. Mr. Jensen, did you call 911 for your wife? Liam's shoulders slumped. No, Your Honor. I thought my mother. I've heard enough, the judge interrupted, her voice cold. The evidence demonstrates a profound and dangerous pattern of neglect and alienation. Mrs. Jensen, you are awarded sole allocation of parental responsibilities. Mr. Jensen, you are granted supervised visitation at a court-approved center to be reevaluated in 6 months. She turned her gaze to Vivian. Mrs. Jensen Sr., you are to have no contact with the minor child without the express written consent of the mother, which I strongly advise her not to give. This court finds your behavior to be manipulative and detrimental to the child's welfare. Vivian shot to her feet. This is an outrage! She's poisoned you against us! She's stealing my son's child! Sit down, madam, the judge said, her voice like a whip crack. Vivian sat, her face mottled with rage and defeat. The carefully constructed facade had finally, utterly crumbled in a room where her performance held no power. Liam looked at Clara, a silent plea in his eyes. She met his gaze for a moment and then looked away, down at her daughter. There was nothing left to say. The victory was not sweet. It was necessary. It was survival. Clara and Lena moved in with Arthur that very day. His house was warm and full of light, a sanctuary. He converted his study into a nursery, and the sound of Lena's laughter soon filled the halls, erasing the last echoes of Vivian's criticism. Clara went back to school, finishing her degree in social work. She got a job at a women's shelter, using her hard-won knowledge to help others build their own fortresses of evidence and escape. Years passed. Lena grew from a baby into a bright, spirited little girl with her great-grandmother's curious eyes and her mother's quiet strength. She loved to paint and to be pushed high on the swings at the park, her laughter ringing out, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. Clara's life was not glamorous, but it was hers. It was built on a foundation of peace and certainty. The legal battles faded into a bad dream, the paperwork stored away in a filing cabinet. One crisp autumn evening, 5 years after that fateful night, Clara and Lena were walking home from the park, hand in hand. The leaves crunched under their feet, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Lena was chattering about her day at kindergarten, about a story she was writing about a dragon. As they turned the corner onto their tree-lined street, Clara's step slowed. A figure stood on the porch of Arthur's house, rigid and familiar against the warm light from the windows. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the posture, the entitled tilt of the head. Vivian. Lena looked up, puzzled. "Mommy, who's that?" Clara tightened her grip on her daughter's small, trusting hand. Her heart beat a quick, steady rhythm, but it was not fear that surged through her. It was a cold, ready calm. She had spent 5 years building a life, brick by brick, promise by promise. She would not let this ghost of the past dismantle it. The woman on the porch straightened, her eyes locking onto Clara's across the distance. The silence between them was heavy with the weight of history, of humiliation, betrayal, and a courtroom reckoning. But behind Clara was the child she had sworn to protect. Within her was the resolve of a woman who had already fought her hardest battles and emerged not broken, but remade. She walked forward, each step a quiet declaration. She was no longer the woman who could be silenced, who could be moved from her seat, who could be abandoned in her hour of need. She was Clara Jensen, a mother, a survivor, a protector. As she reached the edge of the walkway, she lifted her chin. The story was not over. Vivian's reappearance proved that. But the ending was no longer in doubt. Whatever confrontation waited on that porch, Clara would face it with the unwavering strength of a woman who had chosen and won her freedom. Dusk settled around them, and Clara knew, with absolute clarity, that she and Lena would face whatever came next, together.